and truths about reality, and I don't sell any of them short.
Okay, so do you have like a visceral reaction when people start talking to you about Stephen Hawking?
Well, ABC News offered me an interview, actually, back when they interviewed me for 2020, back in the late 1990s. They tried to set up an interview between Stephen Hawking and me. And unfortunately, Stephen, he was, of course, confined to a wheelchair and surrounded by these academic, this guard, these academic security experts whose job it was to protect him from the hoi polloi.
Right.
And so they somehow managed to nix it, and the interview never came off. But had I been able to meet with Stephen Hawking, I think that we'd have had a very fruitful discussion in some respects.
I had Stephen Hawking's wife on the show a little while ago. She had written a book, and his ex-wife, they were the ones. The movie Theory About Everything was based on her book. And, I asked her about this, because the deal is, as far as I'm concerned, it's interesting, is that, he claimed people would say he's an atheist. She says she's a believer. She told me that she didn't think he was an atheist. She thought he was more of an agnostic. So let's talk about those terms: agnosticism, atheism, believer, because I really want to put some labels on you.
Well, you'd have to call me a theist, but as far as the problem between Stephen and his wife was concerned, that sounds to me like a problem of semantics. It sounds like maybe if you'd had a kind of deist god of the kind that Einstein appeared to believe in, that Hawking would have been in favor of that. On the other hand, his wife may believe in a more doctrinaire religious kind of God. God is defined in various ways. The way I define God is as ultimate reality. And if you think about it, really any other definition of God is meaningless. God has to be ultimate, otherwise there has to be something higher than God or more ultimate than God, in which case it's not really God, is it? I mean, there's something higher. If there's something higher, then that has to be God. Yeah. And that, of course, evokes the old argument, the ontological argument of St. Anselm about the existence of God. And so that's more or less what I'm into. What I've done is I've formalized God. If you read the Bible, I mean, everybody's had a little bit of exposure to the Bible, or at least most people have in North America. Yeah. There's a verse in there, John 1:1, and it says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And this is a very pregnant sort of passage in the Bible, and you can actually turn this into a whole view of God and reality, how God is reality in the ultimate sense. And then you can start investigating that structure and picking it all apart and parsing it and organizing it, and you actually get to knowledge about what God is.
Okay, Chris, selfishly, I have interviewing a lot of people over the last number of years because of my own spiritual journey or experiences. It has, I don't know, it's gotten a little loopy on me here. So for 30 years, I was part of the evangelical tribe of certainty. For, let's see, about 7 years, I willingly walked away from it all, having been a pastor, having been part of the evangelical scene, the certainty thing. I walked away from it all. I stopped going to church and the whole thing. And I tried to strip away all tribal conditioning to see if what I believed was real, or if I believed that it was real because of tribal conditioning. And one of my reasons that I have a problem with my belief is because of the lack of what I would say is tangible interaction. So I was sold on a God that is tangibly interactive. And now I'm sitting there going, well, I'm not as freaked out as I once was. It felt like I was going through some dark night of the soul kind of thing. And I had more of an adverse reaction from those certaintists within the evangelical tribe than, I mean, that was the fascinating thing, was people's reaction to my journey. So now someone forced me to come up with a label for, well, what are you now? It was Tony Campolo. He said to me one day, what are you? So I said, well, I would say I'm a red letter agnostic theist. So couple things. One, having heard a little bit of my journey, I kind of bailed on things because of what I would say the lack of tangible interaction with this God that I was sold would be very tangibly interactive. Do you think that's an infantile reaction?
I hate to have to say this, but in a way it is, because when you define God properly as ultimate reality, which is what I spoke about, every experience that you have is a tangible interaction with God. Now, you can't recognize God as being the entity that is making things happen. But in order to actualize your destiny, things have to happen in a way that you don't necessarily perceive. In other words, you have one event here and it kind of turns you around, and then there's another distant event that happens, and all of these non-local events add together to guide you in the proper direction. But you don't see all of these events at once, right? So you can't recognize a hand that is actually reaching into reality and moving things around at your behest,
Right.
right? Okay, so this is it. Basically, it's the linkage between the problematical linkage between ontology and epistemology. What is and what you can know about what is. And unfortunately, we have certain epistemic limitations. We can't necessarily get to the bottom of how things are caused in our lives. Mm-hmm. And this prevents us from seeing the existence of God or achieving certainty about it. Now, the way I go about achieving certainty is actually going back to logic. And then you can use logic to put together a very advanced system in which you can actually derive truths about reality. Not necessarily truths about specific things that happen in reality, but about the overall patterns in which they happen.
Okay, I'm tracking with this. So basically, I felt like I was bailing on my belief in God, when in reality what I was doing was simply throwing out the belief in God that I was taught from the evangelical certaintists, based on this tangible encounter stuff.
Exactly. The tangible encounter, I'm not quite sure what that means, but I think it means that basically you're supposed to see God's hand there locally, right in front of your face in your life, and you can't always do that.
Well, no, but it comes, Chris, to me it comes from the relational aspect of Christianity that's been sold, the God the Father thing. So the Father figure that God is supposed to be. You know, people say, well, God has blessed you. You've got so much. You've been blessed. No, I don't want God's stuff. I don't want Daddy's stuff. What I want is for my Father. I'm going to reach over to Johnny Lang here. What I want is for my Father to just reach out and grab my shoulder, you know, just kind of go, it's all right, kid. I got you. You're doing okay.
But my question is,
but is that lame?
How do you know he's not?
Oh, shut up.
Because it doesn't look the way you want it to look?
That's a great question, and I hate you for it. Yeah.
The fact of the matter is that's exactly what's happening.
What?
God is taking you by the shoulder and guiding you around, but you can't feel it all the time.
Yeah. So in other words, I could be saying that. In other words, the evangelicals are a dangerous group of human beings.
Some of them are, unfortunately, because they oversimplify and they make people believe things that they're eventually going to become disabused of, and at that point they're going to lose their faith. And in that sense, that kind of evangelism is very dangerous. But, you know, we can't overgeneralize and say that all evangelists are dangerous, because I think some of them see beyond that.
Yeah.
It's also it's also the community of religion, in my opinion, can be dangerous as well, because it's immediate compare. You walk into a room in a church, I have torn shoes. The guy across from me believes in the same God that I do, but he's got a nice car and nice shoes, and all of a sudden you start attributing your lack of faith or your strength of faith based on what you see.
Yeah.
Which is another downfall of the religious system, in my opinion.
But more in the North American name it and claim it prosperity crap that's out there. What about the anthropomorphization of God, which is just a fantastic word to be able to get out on radio? So people want to try to pigeonhole Chris Langan and his spiritual beliefs, and I heard one guy, it sounded like a Jesus guy, who wanted you to sort of say that Jesus was the only way, and I don't think you took that bait. But what about just God? So we've been talking about God, but what kind of God are we talking about, Chris? I mean, are we talking about any anthropomorphization? In other words, for the kids out there, God kind of, you know, we're created in his image, so therefore there's something about us that
is godly.
Yeah. Precisely, yeah. Well, what God is a universal potential. I said before that God was ultimate reality. That means that he has to be a universal potential. That means anything you see, any property that anything has in reality that you can actually look at or touch, this all comes from God. It comes from that potential. It is encoded in that potential, as in the CTMU, this is called syntax. And basically, everything that we see is supported in syntax. in the divine language that I was talking about earlier when I was talking about John 1:1. All right, so this is God basically. You can actually look at it like this. We human beings, as images of God, are embedded in God. Therefore, our properties are actually those of God as well. God is human to the extent that God embeds human beings like you and me.
Yeah, well, there's a scripture that says God has set eternity in man's heart, which to me, I would dumb it down to say there's a little bit of God in all of us, and we intrinsically, at some point in our life, know that.
Yes, well, there's actually a lot of God in all of us. There's nothing but God, because God is ultimate reality.
But you're not saying we are gods. You're not saying we're mini gods. You're not, what's that word I'm looking for? Like some sort of Gnostic, anyway.
Right.
Absolutely not, because we are localized, and our consciousness is limited because of our localization, whereas God is a global phenomenon with an entirely different kind of consciousness. So no man can actually be God. But on the other hand, no man can be anything but God, because God is all there is. God is completely self-attributing and self-composed. There is nothing but God in the world, so whatever you are, that has to be God.
Let me throw this out at you. You speak a lot of the elite, the geniuses of the world, the great thinkers. How does that sort of language contrast with the teachings of Jesus, where he speaks of humility and the greatest shall be the least before God and the least shall be the greatest?
Well, all that means is that you really do have to keep a lid on your ego. I was just talking about our localization, the fact that we are not actually as big as God, in the sense that our consciousness is that expanded, that enlarged. That's basically what Jesus was talking about. You can't get the idea that you are God. You can't equate yourself to God. Yes, you're an aspect of God or a part of God, but you are restricted in that sense because you can't see everything. You can only see what's in your immediate vicinity. Now, a lot of these people who are out there, who are running the world, these techie billionaires, and I don't know who the hell else is out there who thinks they run the world, but a lot of them have gotten very big heads on their shoulders, and they think that they can make decisions in lieu of God. They can't do that. They're trying to usurp teleology and actually trying to run the world the way they want to run it, which is the way that works for them economically and socially, and that's not right.
Okay, I don't know how to ask this without sounding like a jerk, like the guy that you want to throat punch at the door of the club. You know what I mean?
It brings back memories. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So here we go, he says from a safe distance. Yeah. Why should we trust you?
Well, I'm not asking anybody to trust me sight unseen. I'm doing things like publishing papers. I mean, if you do your homework, you're going to find out exactly what it is I'm saying. Then, once you find out what it is I'm saying, you can try to get around it. You can try to construct rebuttals or refutations of whatever it is I've said. And I think that if you try to do that, you're not going to be able to. And then you can take a lesson from that. Well, the fact that I haven't been able to refute what he's saying, maybe that means there's something to it, and then you can kind of gain trust that way.
So in other words, what I'm hearing, I love saying that, I've said that 9 times with you, Chris. In other words, you want us to actually do the work, listen to what you're saying, process it ourselves, as opposed to sit back in our lazy boy chairs and see what kind of degrees you have or what kind of institution you work for or what kind of, I don't need to keep going with that example. I think you understand what I'm saying. Because the weird, I probably should not say that. Let me see. I can't backtrack.
In other words?
Yes, in other words. No, the interesting thing about you, man, is you're just like a farmer dude. You're not academia. You're not, Mr. Bookseller guy. You're not speaking tour guy. You're not Mr. TED Talk. You're a farmer with
Johnny Wonder guy.
You're Johnny Wonders guy, which means nothing.
Yeah, I'm just a regular guy. I'm sitting here in a farmhouse, about 120 years old. It's small. I'm in my work clothes. I wear blue jeans. I got a tank top on. And I'm going to be going outside and doing some work soon, actually doing chores, feeding horses and cows, and I don't set myself up on a pedestal like many scholars do, thinking that I don't have to work. I mean, we all have to work. If everybody were able to roll up their sleeves and get out there and do a little bit of work to make society a better place without sitting on their asses 24/7, I think that we'd be living